So welcome to the latest episode of CODA's Plugging Away podcast, your go-to source for in-depth discussions and insights into the world of oil and gas decommissioning. We record these podcasts as a way just to have really interesting conversations with experts from around the world about different things that come up from time to time in the decommissioning space. And I'm absolutely delighted to say that today we've got my friend Kostas Galanis coming to us all the way from sunny Greece to talk about ship recycling and how all of this lot works in the world of decommissioning. So, Kostas, would you like to introduce yourself a little bit and talk a bit about the organisation that you represent, please?
Sure. Thank you very much, Francis. Thank you very much, CODA, for inviting me to have such an interesting discussion about a topic that definitely during the months to follow, I understand will be, at the surface of not only shipping, but actually the whole transportation transition in a new era. So I'm Kostas Galanis. I'm representing today DIDO shipping company, a group that is actually focusing on purely ship recycling in the last 40 plus years, having under the auspices three ship recycling facilities, all of them in the EU list of approved facilities based on the recent European ship recycling regulation that was enforced a few years ago. The facilities we are running are actually located in Turkey, not my office that I'm here in Greece. And we've done over 1,000 ships during this period. Typical conventional ships, as everybody knows. Nevertheless, we've done some, let's say, exotic assets like 4 aircraft carriers, FSOs, FPSOs, and we have a very mature, understanding of how ship recycling has to be done in a worldwide manner. Myself speaking, I'm also serve as the chairman of the International Ship Recycling Association that is not represented today for the sake of good order. I'm a naval engineer, have a life in actually both on board the ships for a number of years, as well as, running senior management positions. I have been educated and not, trained at MIT, receiving a number of degrees. And I'm an engineer. Actually, I've been an engineer. Now I'm working mostly in engineering the world in a very positive manner. So this is, I understand, very brief introduction of who I am.
That's great. Thank you. So to dive straight into this, really, from your perspective, both your own perspective with the Ship Recycling Association and from DIDO as well, just what is the state right now of sort of global ship recycling, and where do you see these things going from an environmental and safety standard?
That's a very interesting question, although sounds, let's say, a typical case for the ones being in the industry or outside the industry. Nevertheless, for ship recycling that has gone through different stages over the last decades, we have a lot of milestones, mainly guided through the introduction and enforcement of new regulatory framework, and especially in the near term, we're discussing about the enforcement of the Hong Kong Convention by 2025. It is very important to understand that is another industry driven by growth and demand. So based on the market research that is published at the web, the ship recycling market has been valued either from $4 billion in 2023 up to $7 billion, and is gradually increasing to either 4 or 11 billion dollars based on the different sources you are using. It is an interesting industry that is following very closely the global and geopolitical developments, and the discussion is actually going back again to the COVID era, where we faced a big pause around the world, so that affected also the ship recycling industry. Going through the post-COVID developments, where several shipping markets were performing in a very positive manner, meaning that not that many ships were actually candidates for recycling. Then we have 2 wars right now still ongoing in very critical, let's say, choke points for shipping, which means affecting some particular commodities like the war between Russia and Ukraine, as well as the Suez Canal or the entrance in the, let's say, Red Sea due to the Houthis attacks. So this mixture and blending of geopolitical and economic developments will actually lead to a transformation of the industry, taking into consideration from the market perspective, which is we're facing the last 2 years, the lowest numbers if we measure the lightweight tonnage of the ships that have been recycled over compared to the last 2 decades. Nevertheless, taking into consideration the implementation of the new convention as well as the transition to decarbonizing our world, we will see these environmental regulations bringing a lot of assets to be recycled going forward. And although, ship recycling should have been a market that could be distributed around the world, most of us know that the major ship recycling states where the ship recycling facilities are actually located are very few. It is India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Turkey. And this is, a challenge for the ship owners as well as other industries related with the ship recycling, for example, the steel mills. Nevertheless, the circular economies that especially the European sector is actually implementing, meaning that we're going to forget this linear economic model of working to minimizing the waste. This will actually alter our sector. So we live in a transition phase. It is a very beautiful era for us, meaning that there is a lot of potential, momentum, opportunities to be able not only to protect the environment and reduce the raw material dependence, but we can create jobs and save consumers money as an industry, because this is actually outside the profitability what profession and business should actually target for.
So a lot of change.
Yep.
So you mentioned the Hong Kong Convention. How is that changing the sort of the landscape of where we're going with, I guess, with the EU and the Hong Kong Convention?
Sure. Everybody, at least from our perspective and the angle that we see things, is waiting to see what will be the difference with the enforcement of the Hong Kong Convention. We have, nevertheless, fortunately or not, which is unfortunately for most of us being in the business part, that we will still face the same complex regulatory framework. So, the Hong Kong Convention is one parameter, but it will be enforced, which means, now it is a game changer. We have also the European ship recycling regulation that was actually progressed in an accelerated mode to actually assist the gap we were facing with the enforcement of the Hong Kong Convention. We still have the Basel Convention that it is included in this basket of parameters that mainly the ship owners have to face. And of course, the flag state, because we're discussing about means of transportation that are traveling around the world and are representing different states that might have a different value, as well as the departure port before recycling, as well as where the ship recycling is. Nevertheless, the beauty, as I said previously, the value, the triggering point that make us excited, no matter all this complexity that we have to face, is also that the green steel is becoming an additional player as an outcome of this sustainability and decarbonization of the world, making the steel of the ship a very premium material that instead of bringing now an obstacle, let's say, or how we will deal, as you have said, right, about a new convention, a new regulation, there is a lot of potential to actually provide value and create jobs for the industry. So Hong Kong Convention, for the time being, to my understanding, will not be that critical, because the ship recycling market has already been adjusted and work on this perspective before even the enforcement. Nevertheless, and this is a personal view because you will hear a lot of views, definitely, it is that the Hong Kong Convention needs to be immediately amended to actually reach in a manner, and I don't want to be proactive, the European ship recycling regulation, to make sure at least we combine both in a way, and we will then try to minimize the number of issues that the ship recycling industry has to face together with the ship owners, because it's not a one-man show. It is a teamwork. We want the ships to be recycled in the proper manner, and the regulations should be there to assist and not to create issues or problems. So we need to resolve this as a community to be able to think that, ship recycling is a straightforward piece of this, life cycle of a ship process, that it is working to the benefit of the ship, because ships do not die. Ships are becoming a commodity that are building new parts of our day-to-day life, and that's why life is interesting and beautiful, and we should not be, we should be optimistic actually on how we're dealing with our business.
So if we get into the specifics of sort of the oil and gas industry from a decommissioning and ship recycling perspective, we're looking at really, several different types of vessels, FPSOs, semi-submersibles, and so forth. What are the standards and special considerations that we have to give to those relative to, say, a more conventional vessel that you might come across?
Yes, dealing with these, let's say, beasts, if I'm allowed to say, because when we're discussing about FPSOs, which is a production unit, these vessels are actually in the logistics chain dealing with the extraction of the oil. So we once again need to try to see what is, the input, the interface of that ship, which is this fossil fuel, and bringing some different characteristics compared to conventional ships. And we're discussing about potential mercury contamination of the ship that is not that easy and straightforward even for the operators of the FPSOs and the FSOs to deal with. Nevertheless, we have seen recently the International Association of Oil and Gas Producers, IOGP, start working on this aspect and, providing guidelines and piece of information to the operators in order to unify that sector. That for us is a positive development. And the other part is there might be NORS. NORS stands for the natural occurring radioactive material, another very critical parameter that only the operators usually are familiar, but it needs a lot of resources, cost, tools, and ways to deal with this particular case, and making that particular piece of our, shipping industry a very special case. So in order to deal with these particular assets, not only expertise is needed, there should be a very in-depth cooperation with operators and a lot of other stakeholders like the ministries, environmental organizations, to manage to, let's say, decontaminate the vessel in the process of the decommissioning part, because usually the ship recycling part is a very small portion of the decommissioning exercise. But we have noticed, based on our experience, that only a few or the oil majors are actually dealing with prioritizing the ship recycling at the very beginning in the decommissioning phase. And this should be lessons learned for the other operators to make sure we're not facing ships that are left in a very critical condition that then other, elements of the market should deal before getting the vessels ready for recycling. And for these reasons, we have seen in the past that such ships went in a very silent mode in yards that they don't actually having even the knowledge to deal with this, because, we cannot always accuse people that they know and they just skip that piece of information. People are not educated, so we should actually spread the knowledge of what are really the hazardous substances, not materials. It's also another terminology that should be corrected, to make sure that we all have the same book, the same manual, and based on this manual we can refer and follow the specific paths to make sure that this business, after so many decades, it is business as usual and it's not a business with windows, gaps, or deviations from what is needed.
So when it comes to preparing these assets then to come to come to a yard, to come to your yards, to go to a different yard somewhere else? What are the steps that the operators and I guess the recyclers need to go through just to make sure that everything's in that book that you talk about?
I understand, Francis, you're referring to the FPSOs and FSOs, right?
Correct.
Not all
Yes.
type of ships. Okay, yes. Now, here is coming another interesting story. If you read the figures, the majority of the FPSOs we're discussing about over 200 assets around the globe are based in the south part of our Earth, meaning that around the 1/4 is actually in Australia, 1/4 in Asia, and the 1/3 in nearby Brazil, for example. The other portion is actually spread on the northern part of our hemisphere. And then the yards that are actually capable of dealing with FPSOs and FSOs are located in a different part of our world, meaning that you have the following difficult equation to solve. You have vessels operating in deep water, usually in international waters, bringing an open field on how you can deal with a ship. Nevertheless, you have a flag. You have to satisfy the requirements of a state. Then usually the Basel Convention is coming as the applicable part, unless the vessel has a European flag, of course, and they fall under the European ship design regulation. You have costly operations to decommission the ship, and you understand that if the operator or the manager have to include also the decontamination of the ship as part of the decommissioning process, it is extra money. And if there is a prudent owner, they would have done their work well in advance. So we're not discussing about something complex. Nevertheless, having an asset at the end of its life, facing increased costs, especially with the biggest cost is the combination of the norms, then it is becoming very, very interesting for some operators of how to deal with this. You have to tow the ship, etc., etc. So that part brings an equation that only very few ship recycling facilities, unfortunately, have the ability, the maturity, the professionalism, the understanding, the know-how, the international way of working, and the most important, the leadership and the, let's say, longevity, because that vessel is one of the ships that definitely, and as you know, in Australia, because, CODA, just also to say a few positive things for your organization, have done a really interesting work to show to the state as well as to the international community that, excuse me, guys, Houston will have a problem or Australia will have a problem. We need to do something in advance to find ways to optimize the process, to reduce the cost, to reduce the risk, and then be able in a smooth transition in the years to follow to actually manage these assets, including the ship recycling, and not only having these assets as a headache, but actually build jobs. Maybe build a ship recycling facility in Australia or deal with that, or see the problem as an opportunity. So the problems are not problems because we have designed and built ships well in advance. We operate them for over 30 years, which is a typical age average of a FPSO, which means we all know the problem. It's just the time to speak up, understand that we know the problem because the problem was there a few decades ago. And there are ways and options to deal with that in a very smooth manner by finding options. But this cannot happen when the vessel is ready for recycling. It has to happen when the vessel is ready for decommissioning.
And that's the thing, isn't it? It's to be proactive, to start early, not to leave it until you're about to connect the vessel onto a tug and tow it somewhere. To actually spend the time in that pre-cessation of production period, getting ready, documenting everything you've got, decontaminating as best you're able, so that you know at least what you've got before you dispatch the vessel for recycling.
True, and we have seen also cases like the FSO Safer, for example, that is a special case that, although this particular exercise of recycling the vessel should have been a straightforward road to lead the vessel to a low-risk environment to deal with the last part of her life were still under discussion and under discussions and under exchange of views of how the job should be done. This is something that, to my understanding, is unacceptable, with all the respect to the organizations, the individuals, the people, ourselves, that we are all part of the community. So there is liability to all of us. Now the percentage might be very low for someone who's attending, but we should all act. We have the NGOs also, another useful part that they are pushing to make things better, so we should respect. We know who we are. We have diversity, which is another part of the sustainability terminology that recently we're using. So we need to protect the workers and the environment. And we have the capacity, Francis. We should not try to, escape from things and try to say that this is a problem, because especially for the FPSOs and decommissioning of these assets, there have been a lot of money actually produced in the past, and that a portion of this should have spent for dealing with the end of life of these assets. So the governments, the states, the flag states, whoever is part of this process can actually discuss with the ship owners and try to find ways of how we can actually, let's say, build a small bucket of money that you, in case, you deal with this asset in a proper manner, this money will go back to you. If an asset will be left alone, and we have seen a similar case happening in Australia the last years, you are more familiar than I am, we should try to not end up in, areas where the decision is very tough, and then, the taxpayers have to deal with this. There are not, equations without solutions in mathematics, and being an engineer, I think that you can always find ways. We need collaboration. Profit and reaching the higher profitability definitely for the business is one parameter. Nevertheless, ship recycling is a family. It should be considered as a critical element of the life of a ship. I've recently published an article in the East of Charter Shipbrokers Network magazine saying that we need to build the ships and design them to be ready for recycling before they are born. Because this is the typical, it's not rocket science, you're not, going to get a Nobel Prize. The case is that, we produce a lot of services and products in a manner that we should consider where they will end up. It's not the producer pays the fees for contaminating the world. It is collaboration. So it is time to open the doors, the windows, be next to each other, and try to share knowledge in areas where safety and environment can never be discounted. So it sounds too romantic probably, and too, I'm not an engineer, I'm a politician, but our world needs to be clean. So from the dirty ship of the shipping industry, we should be now the promoter and the leader of how ships should be designed and built in a perfect, or at least optimum manner, to ensure that when the time comes to be altered and have the steel ready for, managed for other purposes, everybody should be very well standing in this position, and to not discuss steel in 2024, almost 2025, of why the Hong Kong Convention will be a headache. Hong Kong Convention is a positive tool. It is an international tool for the ship recyclers, and we should all, support it and use this as a flag for the years to follow, and try to educate everybody of how we should prepare the ships for the last part before they become bridges or other parts of construction.
That would be lovely, wouldn't it, to get to the point where we're designing for reuse rather than designing just to be safe and reliable for the project that they are built for, but to actually build them so that we can optimize that reuse and recycling at the end.
It is a mentality change, Francis, allow me for interrupting you, because in the past, especially the seaports, they thought when the vessel is not of use, just dump it. just waste it. Just send it somewhere. I don't want to see it anymore because it doesn't produce any revenue and profit. Now that due to decarbonization, this vessel can become a producer of lower emissions, of carbon credits, of value to the steel mill, of ESG requirements. ESG requirements for me will be the game changer for ship recycling and the ship owners, because it brings a bridge with the ship owners to understand that I can handle a valuable piece of my fleet that although is very old, can change my ESG profile, the way I'm communicating what I'm doing to the world, how I can recycle it in a proper manner and bring, lower emissions to the steel mill, which is part of the equation, because the steel, as we have said before, in the circular economy, it is going around the ship. Then I'm sure that very soon the ship owners who are very, smart, because they are dealing in a complex environment. Everybody's smart, but they have to deal with, international operations. That's what I mean, smart or smarter than the rest. Will understand the value, and they will be the ones that instead of trying to dump their ships, they will try to get the value of these end of life assets. And I'm very convinced, no matter what everybody believes, because usually the ship recyclers are blaming the ship owners and vice versa. So we should be partners in this, let's say, crime in the past, but now partners in value.
Yep. That's a really nice way to phrase that, isn't it? Partners in value. That's such a good opportunity in there. Do you see that then as being the role that organisations like the International Ship Recycling Association that you chair and companies like DIDO, do you see that very much as being the role that they can bring into this collaborative environment, to work with the ship owners, to work with the FPSO operators, so that everybody gets the best opportunities from it all?
Yes, Francis, thank you very much for asking this. We are here to support. As DIDO Group, of course, we are a private organization that we are, trying to do our business in the best possible manner and, of course, be profitable, as everybody's doing. The International Ship Recycling Association is working to making sure that everybody should operate under the highest possible standards. That's why we have actually adopted the European Ship Recycling Regulation until we see what the Hong Kong Convention and the transformation probably the Hong Kong Convention will bring to our industry. Most of us being in that, let's say, closed sector, we have read a lot of announcements about signing of agreements to see whether ship recycling facilities can actually emerge and operate in different sectors of the world, from Japan to Bahrain to Brazil, meaning that people have understood what I was telling you before. And this accelerated mood of the Hong Kong Convention, which for me is the flag, as I said, together with the circular economies and the green steel, will actually bring this momentum in a positive way. And there we should be ready to support everyone, because now we have a new partner, which is also the steel mills, trying to find assistance from the ship recycling industry. And that's what I said, it is not a dead industry. That's why not only ships do not die, ship recycling facilities will never die, because it is a part of this physical loop to achieve the circular economy goal. But we need to participate in events and fora and discussions, as we're doing right now, to collaborate with each other, because there's business for everyone. There are a lot of ships, over 60,000 ships. This tonnage is actually shifted forward. The last 2 years, sorry for repeating myself, we had very few ships being recycled, meaning that in the years to follow, a lot of assets will become available, and the ship recycling capacity is there, but can be everywhere. So we will see new ship recycling facilities opening. I don't know how many of them will actually manage to, let's say, survive in the next decade, but definitely a percentage of them will be there as not new competitor, as a new let's say, strategical element to provide additional options and assist this transition of our world to the decarbonized era. This is the target, and there are, let's say, mutual and common goals for all of us to support. So there is room for all of us, and we need younger people in the ship recycling industry, because as the ships are getting older, usually the, let's say, the management or the workers of ship recycling facilities, they have an age average that is not that attractive. But bringing new, let's say, kids on the block will make this industry very, very interesting. And there's a lot of value, as I explained previously, and that's the way going forward. There's only one way to increase the value. The problems are, will never stop, but it depends how you see them, problems or as, accelerators.
Yeah, I think the age demographic across a lot of industry is skewing the wrong way these days, isn't it? We're all getting older. We need more younger people.
It's a matter how you market your industry. So as you have seen today, I'm trying to, to make this attractive for the young generation, because I believe it's not a trick. It's the reality.
No, I would agree. I think that there's a lot of people I speak to, a lot of younger people I speak to, are very, very interested in that circular economy and the opportunities that come with that. And I think a lot of them struggle to actually find places where they can have an interesting job with a long-term career in a different space where they can feel like they're really contributing to that whole circularity and net zero. And something like this, for me, is such a tremendous opportunity in that space for people to get involved with.
Yes, it's fully true. It's not only computer games or sitting in front of a screen. There's a hands-on opportunity, because the interesting part with ship recycling is you have the toys, you have the ships where you can play, quoted play with them to make innovation, to bring technology. Now DIDO is utilizing robotics, for example, to minimize the risk while you are entering in closed spaces. Pretty soon you will see this project in the news, in the news, but we try to use this internally for the sake of the works or the environment, not for publicity or bring your customers. So there are ways, Francis, that because you're a senior guy like me, to understand that we can do our life better, because ship recycling is not rocket science. It's just dealing with a part of the industry that is well known to us when we design ships. We just need to, work together to minimize the problems that the ship owner might face. And the IMO, who will probably listen to that podcast, should immediately work on producing ship recycling plants at the very beginning, the very early stage of designing a ship, and I can explain to them how this can be done to make sure, we will avoid all these black boxes or gray boxes which a ship becomes when the ship owners would like to just dump that vessel, because not all the ship owners around the globe are working with the same efficiency and understanding and professionalism, but there are ways to make sure that the vessel is not a black box anymore. If you make this box a white box at the very beginning, so people cannot use other type of colors.
So big opportunities for collaboration then, governments, international organizations, local companies, just to do it safer, to get the best environmental outcomes and everything else. Yeah. So just to sort of wrap us up then, the challenges then, we've got global challenges, but they're not all challenges, as you say. They're opportunities. They're things that we've worked with before. They're things that we've worked out how to solve and how to work with. Where do you look at when you look at Australia from your beautiful island in Greece there, where you're based, with the view that you've got out of the window? Where do you see the opportunities for Australia? And if you were to be offering advice to us here in Australia around ship recycling from here, what would your thoughts be?
Yes, Australia for us as DIDO Shipping is a very interesting market, if I'm allowed to say, in a geographical distribution around the globe with respect to this particular case. We've done several projects, as you know, by mainly towing or bringing ships from Australia to Turkey. That sounds non-pragmatic for people that they don't have an understanding, they're purely working on the logistics, which I fully agree. It should be, especially taking into consideration the environmental footprint. It is not the optimal way to bring a vessel at the end of life from, let's say, Australia to Turkey, because you pollute the environment at the very end by consuming all this CO2 for the shifting of the ship. Australia should actually work on trying to find, for me, the benefits of the steel mill industry, and especially the production of green steel, or the trade and commodities transition, let's say, from Australia to Japan, that is a traditional path, or Asia, or see how this can be actually optimized as a regional stake, and then try to find, as I understand you've done, by identifying the assets that sooner or later will become available for ship recycling, and make ends meet and see if this equation makes sense, or alternatively try to find international expertise like DIDO shipping or any other players to bring, let's say, a project basis assistance. So when the vessels have to be recycled or even decommissioned, you can utilize such services on a project basis and use them not as consultants, because this is not for me the proper way to do business, because the consultants just give you their view for a particular set of money, and that's all. There's no liability. Bring them in the equation as partners and tell them, what we can do at this stage that we are involved to prepare the vessel or get the value. Actually, decommissioning the ship, it is again creating jobs. Cleaning the vessel is creating jobs. And ship recycling is the end part. So if Australia doesn't really need a ship recycling facility to the extent that we have in other regions of the world, you can create value and jobs and employment by getting involved in the decommissioning and decontamination part of the vessel. And then if you match, as I have said, the steel mill industries or the exportation of steel as a premium material based on this decarbonization part, then probably opening a ship recycling facility at a controlled, let's say, size will be a profitable business. And then you can link that equation. And of course, you need to continuously deal to the international networking about this business, because as we have discussed today, things are changing in a very accelerated mode. And I have to congratulate you, and it's not because we are friends, as CODA, that you took this initiative and show that value to Australia, because Australia is a country that has shown in the past that, for example, biodiversity, which is another very important critical element of our world, and not ship recycling, can be included, and make sure that maybe recycling a vessel in Australia, for example, is working to the benefit of biodiversity rather than, to the benefit of steel mill. So depends the hierarchy of which are the parameters that the state decides to put in line. And then if for biodiversity issues, you can recycle ships in Australia because this for you is of bigger value compared to dealing with the steel, you should do it. So it's a matter of the perception of the country under this regime. And of course, our, support, full support as a person, as DIDO, as ISRA, or as a citizen is always there to make sure, because Australia is fortunately a remote country compared to how the other part of the world is working. We should keep this remote state together with us and, increase the value that can be holistically distributed around the world. Because as I said before, there is business for everyone. We should not always compete. We should compete on fair levels, but we should all be alive, because if there is only a single ship recycling in the world, this is, the end of the story. We should bring more professional ship recyclers around the world, and then we will say that this business is growing, and then everybody will get a share. So we should not be focused on the small part. It's a matter of mentality. But Australia definitely having 1/4 of the FPSOs, for example, distributed around the country, should be in front of the line and not just attending. Raise your voice.
That's been tremendous. Thank you so much for your time today, Kostas. Do you have any sort of last sage thoughts for us before we finish up?
No, collaboration and adaptation for me are the key word. We should adapt, first of all, ourselves, becoming older, but we should see the things in a newer manner because things are changing. So we should all adapt, and we should be collaborative and, of course, optimistic. Ship recycling was there, is here, and will always be, because it is part of the life cycle of a ship. So even if it's a problem for some people or opportunity for others, we should work. And I would like to welcome more younger people to jump in this vehicle and make decommissioning a very interesting part that actually tick all the boxes that the future will bring, as we discussed today. Oh, thank you very much. I think I've said enough.
It's been such an interesting conversation. Thank you so much for your time. And look, we'll conclude it there. We'll include on the notes with the podcast, if anybody wants to follow up, reach out to Kostas just to make sure that there's your contact details are on there. So anybody that wants to get a hold of you and have a further conversation, all of that, we'll include that in the notes when we release the show. So thank you again for your time, my friend.
You're welcome. Thank you very much for the invitation, and I hope the ones who will hear the podcast will find it interesting and will not waste their time.
Oh, never wasting your time in a conversation with you. Thanks, man.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.